Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So you probably don't know this, and I'm not exactly sure why you would, but over the past few days I've had quite a few internet issues. Luckily those issues have now been resolved and my setup is now 100% back to normal. So this morning I was able to get my latest episode, the Quandrix Revealed episode, up this morning in a timely fashion. But due to those internet issues before today, I wasn't able to work on my Precon upgrades episodes like I wanted to. You see, my initial idea was to see the full deck list, talk about the new cards in that deck list, and then take a day or so to process it and make some upgrades. So hopefully that explains why the Lorehold Legacies Precon upgrades is coming out today. So here's hoping that my internet stays fixed so I can get things back on track. Regardless, for this episode, the entire Lorehold Legacies deck with Osgir at the helm has been revealed. So today I'm going to be walking you through some fantastic upgrade options for the deck. So if you're looking to pick up this deck and power it up, this should help. I'm also going to be breaking the upgrades down into different budget tiers. I realize when it comes to Magic, many players have different budgets, so I hope that this is helpful. So with all that said, let's jump into it. So the commander for the Lorehold Legacies pre-constructed deck is Osgir the Reconstructor. Osgir is a 4/4 giant artificer with vigilance that costs 2 red/white. It has pay 1, sacrifice an artifact, target creature you control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. And by paying X and tapping it, you exile an artifact card with mana value X from your graveyard and create 2 tokens that are copies of the exiled card, activate only as a sorcery. So Osgir is a new and exciting type of Boros commander that can utilize the graveyard for a ton of value. Essentially, any and all artifacts that you have can be copied. Now the process to copy them is a bit unique. You need to get those artifacts into your graveyard to copy them. Now you can do that by sacrificing them with Osgir or something else, or milling yourself, or discarding them. However you do it, just get artifacts into your graveyard. Because then by paying their mana cost and tapping Osgir, you exile that card from your graveyard and you get 2 copies of it. This can provide you an absurd amount of value. Again, if you've got artifacts that have ETBs, you can essentially get that same ETB 3 times. The first with the actual artifact, and the second and third with those copies. So if you say have an ETB that draws you a card, you can draw triple as many cards as you would. Or you can just utilize Osgir to basically double up on all of your mana rocks. That's right, this is a Boros commander that can generate you card advantage and ramp you. And it can even essentially ramp you for free with artifact lands. So yeah, Osgir does a lot and he can be quite powerful. Now you can take a commander like this in multiple directions, focusing on different things. So the cards I'm going to recommend for these upgrades can hopefully give you some ideas on how to improve this deck and how to take it in whatever direction you want. So with that said, let's jump into the cards. First up, let's tackle the budget category, focusing on cards that are $2 or less. So typically cards like these can fit in any budget, including my own budget decks. And the first card that I would definitely want to add into my Osgir deck is Coveted Jewel. Coveted Jewel comes in at just $1.29, and it is definitely worth every penny. It's an artifact for 6, and it says when it enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards, and it can tap to add 3 mana of any one color. It also says whenever one or more creatures an opponent controls attack you and aren't blocked, that player draws 3 cards and gains control of Coveted Jewel, untap it. So normally this is a mana rock that can provide you an absurd amount of value, but if someone swings at you and you don't block their creature, they steal it. Not only do they get your mana rock, but they also get to draw 3 cards. But with Osgir, this card is all upside and then some and no downside. So we play this, draw our 3, and if an opponent tries to attack us and we can't block that creature, then we just sacrifice it. So no Coveted Jewel for you. And then we simply pay its mana cost again, and sometimes even just use the mana that this generates. We tap Osgir, we exile this from our graveyard, and we get 2 copies of it. So both copies come into play, we get 6 cards, and then we get to tap them for 3 mana each. So in total, we're drawing 9 cards and can generate a ton of mana. And again, if someone swings at us, instead of just letting them take these, we're just going to sacrifice them. So with Coveted Jewel, we've got a ton of upside, and we can negate that downside. But next up, let's talk about another artifact that's good for another reason. Uggin's Nexus is a legendary artifact that costs 5 and it costs $1.21. It says if a player would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. If Uggin's Nexus would be put into a graveyard from the battlefield, instead exile it and take an extra turn after this one. So first off, this is an extra turn stopper for our opponents. But more importantly, in a deck like this that can pretty much sacrifice an artifact whenever we need to, we can just sacrifice this to get an extra turn. Now unfortunately when we do that, this exiles itself, so we can't get it back with Osgir and have extra turn shenanigans, but that's okay. Having a 5 mana stop other players from getting extra turns, sack it whenever we really want to get an extra turn thing on the battlefield is pretty good. Next up though, let's talk about some really budget friendly cards that are great in this deck for other reasons with Elsewhere Flask and Sleeper Dart. Elsewhere Flask is a very simple card. It's an artifact that costs 2, and when it comes into play, you draw a card. On top of that, you can sacrifice it and choose a basic land type, and each land you control becomes that type until end of turn. Now, the main thing that is important with this card is that when it comes into play, it draws you a card. And on top of that, we can sacrifice this for free. So we play this, draw a card, and sacrifice it. We pay 2 mana, we tap Osgir, and we get 2 copies of this by exiling it from our graveyard. So we just drew 2 more cards. So in Boros for 4 mana, we just drew 4 cards. And Sleeper Dart can be even better. Like Elsewhere Flask, it costs 2, and when it comes into play, it draws us a card. But with this one, we can tap and sacrifice it, and target creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So we can still sacrifice it for free, and that effect is probably going to be more useful most of the time. Again, we're basically drawing 3 cards for 4 mana, and we can shut down 1 creature multiple times or multiple creatures. Of course, there are plenty of these types of cards to consider, like Golden Egg, Guild Globe, and Terrarian. Golden Egg and Guild Globe once again have that ETB where they draw us a card. And with these, again, we can basically sacrifice them for free because when we pay into them and tap them, we can sacrifice them for mana. And then Terrarian is slightly different in that it enters the battlefield tapped but only costs 1. It has pay 2 mana and sacrifice it, add 2 mana in any combination of colors. And when it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, we draw a card. So again, we can sacrifice this one for free on its own, but we do have to wait for it to untap. Of course, in this deck, though, we've got other ways to sacrifice cards for free, so we'll talk about those here in a bit. Regardless, with just this and Osgir over multiple turns, this is going to draw us 3 cards for just 2 mana. So yeah, artifacts that might not see a ton of play elsewhere can have a lot of use in a deck like this. Now, like I mentioned earlier, another way to get artifacts into our graveyard is by discarding them with cards like Thrill Possibility, Tormenting Voice, and Cathartic Reunion. Each of these are very affordable cards, with the most expensive of all of them being just 12 cents. Thrill Possibility says, as additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, draw 2 cards. So we get some card advantage, and we can put an artifact that we want to get tokens of into our graveyard right away. And then Tormenting Voice does the exact same thing, though this one's at sorcery speed. Still though, it's a very effective card in this deck. And Cathartic Reunion does this in an even bigger way. It says additional cost to cast this spell, discard 2 cards, draw 3. So again, we can draw even more cards, and we can pitch a couple of artifacts into our graveyard. Again, our artifacts can provide us value by casting them, but by getting 2 tokens of them, we're getting even more value. So by discarding them, we kind of skip a step if we really want to, by just actually putting them in the graveyard and getting them back as tokens. Now, our commander does have a fantastic sacrifice effect, but it does cost mana, so we're also going to want to include some things that, well, can let us sacrifice artifacts for free. So some other upgrades to consider are Piston Sledge, Rusted Slasher, and Slowbad Goblin Tinkerer. Piston Sledge is a 10-cent equipment that costs 3. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control, equipped creature gets +3/+1, equip, sacrifice an artifact. So as long as we've got at least 2 creatures on the field, we can just move this from one creature to another by sacrificing an artifact. One that can be even more effective though is the 1-cent card, Rusted Slasher. It's a 4/1 that costs 4, and it says sacrifice an artifact, regenerate Rusted Slasher. So this is a free sacrifice outlet that can protect itself. And speaking of hard to deal with, there's Slowbad Goblin Tinkerer. It's a 1/2 Goblin Artificer for 1 in a red, and it says sacrifice an artifact, target artifact gains indestructible until end of turn. So yeah, we can protect one artifact by sacrificing another artifact for free. And again, a free sacrifice outlet is almost always going to be better than one you have to pay for. It just makes Osgir a lot more efficient not having to pay that one. But now let's talk about some other cards that love artifacts for different reasons with Goblin Engineer and Kuldotha Forgemaster. Goblin Engineer comes in just under our $2 mark at $1.95. It's a 1/2 Goblin Artificer that costs 1 in a red. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact card, put it into your graveyard, then shuffle your library. And by paying a red, you tap it to sacrifice an artifact, return target artifact card with converted mana cost 3 less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So Goblin Engineer can do a ton for this deck. First off, it's basically a 2 mana, go get whatever artifact you want in your deck, put it into your graveyard for Osgir to target. Even if you just want to go get something like Soul Ring, that's incredibly powerful. Okay, so I paid 2 for this, I will pay 1 to tap Osgir, exile my Soul Ring, and I get 2 copies of it. Now I can tap both those copies of Soul Ring for 4 mana in total. I just netted mana. And of course, you can go get whatever artifact that you need for the situation that you're in. and its activated ability can be incredibly impactful as well. You could literally just keep looping those 2-mana artifacts that draw you a card. You sacrifice one, you get another. You sacrifice one, you get another. Every single turn you're drawing a card for 1 mana. Goblin Engineer has a ton of applications in this deck, and another card with a lot of applications is called Dotha Forge Master. It's a 3/5 construct for 5 mana, and currently it's around $1.63. By tapping it, you sacrifice 3 artifacts, insert your library for an artifact card, and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So this can help us get artifacts into our graveyard, and it can help us tutor for more artifacts to get into play. Yeah, that's powerful. Just think about having 2 of these going at the same time. Now, depending on what direction that you want to take this deck, 2 other cards to potentially consider are Rootborn Defenses and Song of the World Soul. Rootborn Defenses is a 13-cent instant for 2 and a white. It says populate, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. So to populate, you create a token that's a copy of a creature token you control. So keep in mind that unfortunately, populate only deals with creature tokens. But if you're going to have a decent amount of artifact creatures in this deck, this is definitely one to consider. Obviously, Osgir can make you 2 copies of an artifact creature if it's in your graveyard. So you can cast this, protect your team by giving them indestructible, and get another copy of that creature. If you've got something like a Mere Battlesphere, that's a lot of value. And again with those Mere Battlesphere tokens, if you've got something like Song of the World Soul in play, that's going to be even more incredible value. It's a 52-cent enchantment that costs 4 white. It says whenever you cast a spell, populate. So again, if you've got a token copy of a powerful artifact creature like Mere Battlesphere, you can just keep getting more and more copies of it. Again, these are not going to be right for every single Osgir deck, but they're definitely ones that I wanted to point out for ones that are going to go in artifact creature direction. But now let's move on to our next budget category, which goes from cards that are $2 all the way up to $10. And first up, I want to highlight some incredibly efficient mana rocks with Thran Dynamo and Gilded Lotus. Thran Dynamo comes in at $3.73, and it's an artifact for 4 that taps for 3. Or I should say technically it taps for colorless. Regardless, just costing 4 mana and tapping for 3 is huge. Again, let's just even go through the scenario of casting this and then sacrificing it with your commander. You pay 4 mana, you tap this for 3, and you use 1 mana to sacrifice this with your commander. You pay 2 more mana for 4 mana in total, and then you tap your commander and exile this from your graveyard, making 2 copies of it. So now you've got 2 mana rocks that tap for 6 mana in total. And essentially the amount of mana that you used to do this was 6 mana in total. So essentially you got your mana back right away. And again, if you've got a free sacrifice outlet in play, it's even more impactful. Now, Gilded Lotus might not be as efficient, but it does help you fix your mana. At $4.44, it's an artifact that costs 5, and it taps for 3 mana of any one color. Again, getting 2 copies of either of these in play can be huge. I mean, this kind of ramp is going to make the green player even envy with green. Get it? Envy with green? Okay, that was bad. Anyways, let's move on to some artifacts that can provide us some card advantage with Mishra's Bauble, Urza's Bauble, and Tome of Legends. Mishra's Bauble comes in at $2.85, and it's an artifact that costs 0. It has tap, sacrifice it, look at the top card of target player's library, draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. Now, looking at the top card of someone's library is nice, but that card draw is really what we care about. This is basically a delayed 0 mana cantrip. So we play this, we sacrifice it, and we're going to be drawing a card at some point. Then we pay 0 mana, tap our commander, and get 2 copies of this. We sacrifice those as well and get 2 more delayed draws. So in total, we just paid 0 mana to draw 3 cards. Ancestral Recall, eat your heart out. Urza's Bauble does the exact same thing essentially, but its effect is slightly different. At $2.68, it's an artifact for 0, and it says, tap, sacrifice it, look at a card at random in target player's hand, you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So we get to look at a random card from someone's hand. Not really what we care about, but sure, that's nice. Drawing 3 cards for 0 is much better. And then Tome of Legends is a $3.33 artifact for 2 mana. It enters the battlefield with 1 page counter on it, and whenever our commander enters the battlefield or attacks, we put a page counter on it. By paying 1 and tapping it, we take a page counter off of it and we draw a card. Getting 2 copies of this out can provide us a ton of card advantage throughout the game. Again, Osgir has Vigilance, so if we've got the opportunity to attack safely, we're going to with this in play. And again, Vigilance is huge with Osgir because we're not wasting tapping him on attacking. And speaking of tapping Osgir, we're going to want some ways to untap him even more with things like Magerite Stone and Sword of the Parents. Magerite Stone comes in at $5.10, and it's an artifact for 2 that has pay 1 and tap it, untap target creature with an activated ability with tap in its cost. Osgir has that, so this is basically pay 1 mana, tap it to untap Osgir. But again, if we sacrifice this, get it back, and we have 2 copies of it, we pay 1 mana twice to untap Osgir twice. And again, with mana rocks or lands that can actually net us mana, this can lead to some really explosive turns where we get really ahead on card advantage or ramp. And then Sword of the Parents is currently $4.62, and it's an artifact equipment that costs 4. It says as long as equipped creature is tapped, tapped creatures you control get +2/+0. As long as equipped creature is untapped, untapped creatures you control get +0/+2. In pay 3, you may tap or untap equipped creature. Although pumping our creatures is nice, the most important part about this card is paying 3 to untap Osgir. Again, being able to get multiple activations in a turn from Osgir can be huge. And with the amount of mana that we can generate in a deck like this, it's going to be very easy for us to do this multiple times in a turn. Next up, let's talk about some effective ways to sacrifice our artifacts with things like Goblin Welder, Grinding Station, and Arcbound Ravager. Goblin Welder comes in at $6.38, and it's a Goblin Artificer for a red. It's got quite a bit of text, so here we go. Tap it, choose target artifact a player controls and target artifact card in that player's graveyard. If both targets are still legal as this ability resolves, that player simultaneously sacrifices the artifact and returns the artifact card to the battlefield. Basically, sacrifice one thing to get another thing back. So again, this can be a free way to sacrifice artifacts, though only one per turn, though it can give us an incredible amount of value with ETB effects. And it can essentially help us cheat on mana cost by sacrificing small artifacts for bigger ones. And then we've got Grinding Station, which comes in at $5.20, and it's an artifact for 2. It has tap, sacrifice an artifact, target player puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard. And whenever an artifact comes into play, we untap Grinding Station. So essentially this is a free sacrifice outlet that can also mill us. And that is huge in a deck like this. We use this to sacrifice an artifact to get more into our graveyard. We tap Osgir, exile an artifact from our graveyard, get 2 tokens of it, then this untaps. Twice. So if we want to sacrifice 2 more artifacts and mill ourselves for 6, we can. Yeah, if you've got the budget for it, it might be worth trying to include this one in the deck. And then we've got Arcbound Ravager, which comes in just under that $10 budget at $9.26. It's a 0/0 beast for 2 that says sacrifice an artifact, put a ++1 counter on Arcbound Ravager, and it's got modular 1. So modular 1 means that this enters the battlefield with a ++1 counter on it, and when it dies, you can put its ++1 counters on another target artifact creature. So basically, this is a free sacrifice outlet that grows throughout the game. If it's going to die, or essentially whenever you want to, you can sacrifice it to put all of its counters on something else. Now again, that does have to be an artifact creature, so this might not be for every single Osgir deck. But again, like those populate cards, if you're going to have a lot of artifact creatures in your deck, this is definitely one to consider. And finally in this category, we've got Inventor's Fair, which comes in at $8.39. It's a legendary land that says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. You can tap it for a colorless, and by paying 4 and tapping and sacrificing it, you search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Activate this ability only if you control 3 or more artifacts. So yeah, this is basically just a land that gains us life in this deck, and we can also pay 4 and tap and sacrifice it to tutor for any of our artifacts. Definitely a fantastic card to include in this deck if you've got the budget for it. But now it's time for us to up our budget even further, going to $10 or more. And the first cards I want to bring up are Umbral Mantle and Thornbite Staff. Umbral Mantle is a $13.01 equipment that costs 3 and it costs 0 to equip. It says equipped creature has paid 3, untap it, this creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So this can be another way to utilize Osgir multiple times in a turn. And speaking of that, there's Thornbite Staff, which comes in at $11.40. It's a 2-mana shaman equipment that costs 4 to equip. It says equipped creature has paid 2, tap it, this creature deals 1 damage to our creature or player. Whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, untap this creature. Now, pinging a creature is nice, but not all that necessary most of the time. Basically, for this deck's purposes, this is, hey, whenever a creature dies, Osgir just untaps. So we can utilize Osgir more times in a turn. This is especially effective if we've got some artifact creatures to sacrifice as well. And speaking of sacrificing artifacts, let's move on to Krark Clan Ironworks. This is a really expensive card at $20.25. It's an artifact for 4, and it says sacrifice an artifact, add 2 to your mana pool. Again, Osgir is a sacrifice outlet for us, but we have to pay for it. And then we've also talked about other artifact sacrifice outlets that don't cost anything. And then there's this one, which actually nets us mana. So the artifact that we sacrifice can actually help pay for itself and potentially then some when we actually get it back with Osgir. Again, let's just use Sol Ring as an example. We cast it for 1, we tap it for 2. We sacrifice it with this, and now we've got 4 mana in our mana pool. We use 1 of that mana to use Osgir to bring 2 copies of it back. We tap both those copies for an extra 4 mana, putting us at 7 mana total. And if for whatever reason we actually want to sacrifice those Sol Ring tokens, we could, and we'd be at 11 mana. This, 1 Sol Ring in our commander, just generated us 11 mana. Yeah, if you've got 20 bucks lying around and you really want to spice up this Osgir deck, definitely include this card. And pretty much another auto-include in this deck, if you've got $42.40 lying around for it, is Anointed Procession. It's an enchantment for 3 and a white, and it says if an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many of those tokens instead. This is absolutely crazy with Osgir. Now instead of 2 token copies of something, we get 4. Would you like 4 copies of Sol Ring? Yes, please. So yeah, you've definitely got to pay up for this card, but it can do some incredibly impactful and powerful things in this deck. Now you can find the links for all these upgrades in the description below. There are going to be 3 separate links, one for each budget category. So cards that are less than $2, cards that are between $2 and $10, and cards that are $10 or more. And also in the description below, I included a link that includes some cards that you might want to potentially remove from the deck to include some of these upgrades. Again, when you're adding cards into a deck and taking cards out, it definitely comes down to a lot of factors. It comes down to your playstyle, your personal preference, and your meta. So make the decisions that are right for you, because there's absolutely no right or wrong way to upgrade a deck. So make the decisions that you want to make. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.